basis points, not only for this year, even, for next year. And similarly, inflation, there is mixed response globally for inflation, especially for US. It's projected forecast to go up because of the tariffs that they will be imposing. For other countries, the impact would be different, depending on the situation that they are in. For India, we have given, our assessment. As you can see, the growth rate we have reduced by 20 basis points this year, primarily arising out of the uncertainties, the various channels through which this is elaborated in detail in my statement. And on the inflation front, we have said, it can move actually both ways because of the surplus, because of the demand that is going to shrink as a result of the trade tariff friction. It may help. On the inflation front. You are seeing that the crude prices have also gone down. So all in all, more than inflation, we are concerned about its impact on growth. And accordingly, you can read the statement for further details. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next we'll have Lata from CNBC.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. Governor, you had said that the real rate for you should be 150 basis points in a previous conference. Now, per your forecast, throughout this year, inflation is going to be below 4%. In which case, the real rate today is actually 200 basis points. So do you think there is a chance for a double rate cut should have been already, like a 50 basis? Because we're very far away from that 150 real rate. We are at 200. And do you think the real rate itself should be 5/4 because you are expecting inflation to be even below 4%? How would you assess that? And just a related question, liquidity in the past, the Reserve Bank has guided on the liquidity amount. That helps transmission, basically. They have said that we want liquidity to be 1 to 1.5% of NDTL or negative 1 to 1.5% of NDTL. Would you want to give the bankers some comfort zone like that? My liquidity threshold is 2 lakh crore or some percentage of deposits so that transmission happens.
So this figure of 1.5%, I don't recall, having made it. Maybe some of my predecessors may have made that statement. I think from studies that we have, the real rate is to be in the range of, different studies are there from 1.1% to 1.9%. So 1.5% is quite a plausible, real rate or a natural real rate, as you call it over there. Insofar as the policy rate is concerned now going forward, we have, as you can see, we have changed the stance from neutral to accommodative. So obviously, the trend is going to be downwards. As regards inflation, the average is 4% this year. The average next year, we really don't know, right?
The calendar year, it is below 4.
For the calendar year, yes, it is below 4. But for the next quarter, for the first quarter, it is more than 4%. We will look at, the evolving situation as we have already mentioned, and basis our forecast and outlook for the growth and the inflation. As you are aware, these are uncertain times, and so we will take a call as to where the policy rate should actually move to. With regard to liquidity, I already made a mention in the statement without giving any numbers over there that we will keep it sufficiently in surplus. I again reiterate, that we will provide sufficient liquidity for the purposes of monetary policy transmission. I don't want to give a number, really, as to what kind of a surplus, but sufficiently in surplus. And you mentioned, linking it to NDTL. Well, yes, that is the kind of number, about 1% or so in the surplus range now that, we are on the easing cycle. That is the kind of, number that we will be looking at. And we'll keep it sufficiently, surplus. The aim really is to look at the policy rate. So if we are able to transmit it, to the overnight rate, hopefully it will then transfer to the other short-term, medium-term, and the long-term interest rates. Transmission, you are aware, it takes a little while. It's not over. It will not happen, immediately. We have seen it in the past, that transmission, when we increased it by the repo rate by 250 basis points, it took 6 to 9 months at least, for the interest rates to decrease in response to the policy repo rate decrease. And they also, did not decrease to a corresponding amount. The decrease was about 204 basis points only, as against the 250 basis points increase in the repo rate. So we are watchful. We will provide sufficient liquidity to the system so that this transmission of the policy rate into the interest rate happens quickly. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Moving on to Mr. Vishwanath from NDTV Profit.
Thank you for the opportunity, Governor. I must say, happy to be back in this room. It's looking a little better now. I wanted to ask you, since you mentioned transmission, I just wanted to get a view that there was a view from the RBI, or at least reports suggested that there was a view from the RBI that credit deposit ratios at banks were, private banks were way too high, and that they needed to come down. Now that we're talking about transmission, eventually, obviously, that will have to translate to higher lending. Are you happy with the credit deposit ratio at this point in time? And the second part is then there's a view that RBI will have to do, or the monetary policy will have to do the heavy lifting in supporting the economy in the current macroeconomic setup. Do you agree with that? Do you think that you have a bigger responsibility to manage in the current scenario?
So coming to your first question, CD ratio, see, when we were in the districts, then we would look at CD ratio basically to see as to whether the credit as a percentage, of the deposits is sufficient, whether, the lending is going on sufficiently. And at that point of time, I'm talking about 25, 30 years, we used to think that 75%, is very good. So some regions, have low because they are savers. Some, where there are more of borrowers, you have high CD ratios. Coming, to your question, CD ratio, well, we do not have, any such prescription of a CD ratio. You are aware that there are no regulations for CD ratio. And however, we do have regulations for asset liability management. That's more important. We have regulations for liquidity management, and there are regulations for liquidity, for the short term in the form of the LCR guidelines that you are aware of over the 30-day period, requiring banks to maintain, and even NBFCs to maintain high quality liquid assets. And similarly, for a longer 1 year duration, there is this NSFR, NFSR ratio that we have prescribed. There is no ratio or no guideline with regard to CD. The banks have to be actually mindful of managing their asset liability, which is important. They have to be mindful and ensure that they have liquidity, both short term and sufficient funds, over medium and long term, so that there are no mismatches and there are no liquidity related issues. The increased capex, whether it is in terms of the tax rebates on the personal income tax side, and we will also, we have reduced repo rates. We have changed the stance going forward, which means that the direction of the policy repo rate is downwards. Where it will reach, Lata, of course, asked that question. We really don't know. I'm Sanjay, but I'm not Sanjay of Mahabharat to be able to, foresee that far. I do not have that that divine vision, that he had. But we will jointly, try to manage the growth and the inflation dynamic in our country.
Thank you, sir. अब मैं ईटी स्वदेश के अनुराग शाह को आमंत्रित करता हूँ।
नमस्ते सर। सर, जो पर्सनल लोन पे आरबीआई की चिंता थी, अब उस किस तरह का रुख है? क्योंकि हमने FY25 में देखा है कि सबसे बड़ा सेगमेंट जो है पर्सनल लोन का रहा है। तो अब जिस तरह से सर पर्सनल लोन के अंदर ही टेक्नोलॉजी बदल रही है और अलग अलग सेगमेंट भी उभर के बाहर आ रहे हैं, जिसमें हमने देखा है कि जो आम लोग हैं उसमें हिस्सा ले रहे हैं, जैसे हेल्थ केयर हो गया, इंश्योरेंस प्रीमियम वगैरह भी पर्सनल लोन के हिस्से में आ रहा है और वहां पे बड़ी अमाउंट पे ब्याज भी वसूला जा रहा है। तो क्या जो आज को लेंडिंग से जुड़ा हुआ जो आपने ऐलान किया है वहां पर राहत देते हुए उस संदर्भ में है, या फिर एक अलग सेगमेंट बनाया जा सकता है जहां पर जो जरूरी चीजों से जुड़ा हुआ लोन लोग लेते हैं उन्हें राहत दी जा सके? और सर दूसरा छोटा सा सवाल होगा सर, जो आरबीआई का पहले रुख था कि जो बैंकों की सब्सिडरी है, इंश्योरेंस सब्सिडरी, वहां पे 20% तक ही आप हिस्सा अलाउ कर रहे थे, लेकिन हमने पिछले 3-4 महीने में देखा एक बैंक को 26% तक 2 कंपनियों में अलाउ किया है, अभी एक बैंक ने 30% तक भी हिस्सा खरीदा है। तो क्या रुख थोड़ा बदला है?
आपका पहला प्रश्न की चिंता है तो चिंता नहीं है, कोई चिंता नहीं है। देयर इज नो वरी। जो है हमारा जो सिस्टम है वो काफी अच्छा सुदृढ़ है और काफी मजबूत है। चाहे वो टोटल आप बैंकिंग सेक्टर, एनबीएफसी सेक्टर के बारे में बात करें या चाहे आप जो पर्सनल लोन के बारे में आपने बात की, मैं यहाँ पे आपको स्पष्ट करना चाहता हूँ कि पर्सनल लोन्स के लिए जो हमने रिस्क वेट बढ़ाया था हाल ही में 125% किया था, वो उसे एक बढ़ोतरी के रूप में नहीं देखना चाहिए, क्योंकि कोविड से पूर्व के पहले का जो रिस्क वेट था, जो हमने कोविड के समय में एक रिस्क वेट क्रेडिट को और अधिक बढ़ाने के लिए हमने वो रिस्क वेट कम किया था, तो उस लेवल को, उस रिस्क वेट को हमने वापस उस स्तर के ऊपर में हम लेकर के गए हैं। हमने उसको बढ़ाया नहीं है। हमने जो उसका ओरिजिनल जो उसका स्तर था उस स्तर के ऊपर में हम लेकर के आए हैं। दूसरी बात मैं यहाँ पे ये भी कहना चाहूंगा कि उसका जो रिस्क वेट है आज के दिन में, यदि जैसा कि कुछ लोग ऐसा मांग करते हैं कि इसको कम करना चाहिए, तो फिर उसी प्रकार से फिर जो दूसरे जो पर्सनल लोन है, क्योंकि जो हमने रिस्क वेट बढ़ाया वो बेसिकली जो अनसिक्योर्ड जो पर्सनल लोन्स थे उनके लिए बढ़ाया 125%, जो वापस से पुराना स्तर किया। तो फिर आप तो ये बात तो मानेंगे कि जो सिक्योर्ड लोन है और जो एक अनसिक्योर्ड लोन है उसमें रिस्क वेट में कुछ फर्क तो रहना चाहिए। तो वो फर्क जो पहले 25% था उसको हमने वापस से हम लाए हैं। ये कोई चिंता का कोई, लेकिन आज के दिन में हमारे लिए इसमें कोई विषय नहीं है। दूसरा, आपने जो प्रश्न किया कि इंश्योरेंस कंपनीज के लिए कुछ बैंक्स का जो उसके अंदर निवेश है उसके प्रतिशत को हमने शायद बढ़ाया है। जहाँ तक मेरी जानकारी है इसमें कोई बढ़ोतरी नहीं हुई है। पहले भी कोई प्रतिशत इसके अंदर में निश्चित नहीं था, आज के दिन में कोई प्रतिशत निश्चित इसके लिए नहीं है और इसमें कोई बदलाव हमने नहीं किया है। बैंक्स, एनबीएफसी, बैंक्स, इंश्योरेंस कंपनीज में निवेश कर सकते हैं, वो 51% या उससे अधिक भी निवेश कर सकते हैं और उससे कम भी निवेश, जैसा 30% आपने कहा, वहां पे भी कर सकते हैं। कुछ इसके अंदर में बदलाव हम लोग जरूर हमने पहले उसके लिए हमने ड्राफ्ट रेगुलेशंस हमने पब्लिश किए हुए हैं, उसमें भी इस संदर्भ में कोई बदलाव प्रस्तावित नहीं है। ओवरऑल क्या किस प्रकार से स्वरूप होना चाहिए, किस प्रकार से बैंक्स अन्य सब्सिडरीज में और कंपनीज में निवेश कर सकते हैं, उसके बारे में हम शीघ्र ही उचित निर्णय लेंगे।
धन्यवाद सर। नेक्स्ट विल बी मिस्टर मयूर शेट्टी फ्रॉम द टाइम्स ऑफ इंडिया।
Thank you, sir. Governor, I had a question on the gold loans development measures that you mentioned. You said there'll be a harmonization of rules, but will that be tightening by making them more tighter or making them easing the LTV?
In my statement, I never said tightening. I said the word used is harmonization. The markets are reading it the way they will read, read it based on emotions, etc. someone said, I think Benjamin Graham, that it is the stock market is a voting machine in the short run. And in the long run, it's a weighing machine. So let's wait. I think for the guidelines will be issued soon. There is no, to our mind, there is no tightening. It is a rationalization only. It's broadly an extension of whatever on the conduct side primarily, whatever were the guidelines for NBFCs, those have been extended now to the banking sector also. You will shortly, we will publish. And these are draft guidelines. Subject to, further consultation and then finalization.
And so clarification on the 1% NDTL. So you're saying that the goal is to have 1% surplus liquidity in the system around 2.7 lakh crore.
I would not like to, pin myself down to, 1% exactly, but yeah, that is, the kind of range, near about, that range. If more is required, we'll do more. If less is required, we will do less. Main aim, as I mentioned, is to ensure proper transmission of the repo rate into the interest rates. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next is Mr. Manojit from the Business Standard.
Good afternoon. Thank you. You said an interesting thing that, the stance should not be directly associated.
Did you want to add on the gold loan or we wait for the publication?
I think so, you have covered it. The draft circular will be out in public domain very shortly. I think you can see the details there.
Okay.
Yeah. RBI said this earlier, but not in as many words, that the stance should not be directly associated with liquidity conditions. If I understand correctly, you are aiming to have a surplus liquidity of around 1% of NDTL. So what does you mean by this? I'm aware that the liquidity framework is being revised now. Can you throw some light? What are the considerations for the revised liquidity framework?
Let's wait. See, right now under the liquidity framework, we are primarily looking at the overnight rate in the money market, and so whether it should continue to remain the same for the purposes of the transmission of policy. Repo rate, whether it should be that we should be targeting or we should be targeting something else. That is something that we are consulting the various stakeholders, and shortly, we will come out. I really don't have, any specific answer because that matter is still being deliberated. Would you like to add something on this?
Nothing. I think once we finalize, we are at this point of time discussing the issues. As Governor said, one of the things is what should be the target rate. You know that call volumes had come down significantly compared to other overnight volumes. And as usual, for any revision of framework or rethink of a framework or review of a framework, we would look at all the tools that we use. Currently, we use a range of tools of different maturities, variable, fixed, and all that. We'll look at those rates and see what changes are required.
No, but the objective is also to speed up transmission. Transmission now take 2 quarters. Is the objective also to speed up transmission? Do you expect banks to transmit this 50 basis point on a more, on an earlier? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, obviously one would like, that the transmission happens as quickly as possible, but then it should not be disruptive. So how do we do that is something, again, I think we will look into it and we will take a call. Early, I will not be able to give a date because I have not reviewed it with my team, but we are looking to do it, as early as possible.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next, we'll have Ms. Swati from Reuters.
Thanks a lot, sir. So since tariffs have been the theme and something that was largely discussed, so just wanted to understand, China would most likely use, yuan depreciation as a tool, to get back at the US in the tariff war now. We've also seen, FPI outflows from India in April. We could see the balance of surplus being negative. What would the RBI's currency management strategy be? Because the rupee would definitely be impacted by what happens to the yuan going ahead. And in the same way, so when we've seen previous periods of crisis like the GFC, COVID, etc., we saw a lot more collaboration and coordination between global central banks. Is that something that is happening even now? Is there an effort being done on that? Thank you.
My understanding is, see, that the impact of these tariffs on India vis-a-vis some of the other countries, you mentioned China and some of the smaller countries, is much less. Our exports overall, about 12% of GDP, less than 1%, I think, for 2%, I think, for America, for USA. You compare it with some other countries, even China is about 19%. Germany is 37% exports overall, and even EU, is 30% plus. So our and smaller countries, have in about 80%. I'm not talking about those countries, Vietnam, Taiwan, etc. So to that extent, we are better placed than some of the other countries. That's why you are seeing that these reciprocal tariffs on India are lower than, some of these countries, because our surplus vis-a-vis those countries is much less. And so we have, in some ways, I mentioned it in my statement also, that we have a comparative advantage. We may have, a comparative advantage vis-a-vis some of these countries insofar as the USA is concerned. But overall, of course, it is certainly still, a growth dampener. And insofar as the currency management is concerned, as you know, we do not actually intervene in the currency management. It's only, for excessive or disruptive volatility that we do so. We do not try to manage or target any rate or band or level of the Indian rupee.
Just clarifying that. So it's fair to say that, if there is a depreciating pressure on the rupee, RBI will let it slide. Is it fair to say that if globally currencies are falling and emerging market currencies are falling?
See, as I mentioned, if there is excessive, we don't, target any level. We do not target any level. I think the markets in India are quite deep, quite wide, and the market forces best know what the levels should be. Having said that, any excessive volatility, if it requires an intervention, we will not be found wanting. We will certainly intervene wherever it is required.
Thank you, sir. I'll request everybody to stick to one question only, so that everybody gets a chance to ask. So next, I'll request Mr. Ashish from PTI to ask his question.
Thank you, sir. So you mentioned about you can't possibly predict the way forward on the rates. But sir, what would be the chance if major central banks really continue to hold for long? You have taken a shift with the stance, but will it allow us the room to cut further?
I mentioned in my policy statement that, what the impact really could be on the globally, of these global tariffs, etc., and uncertainties, what the impact could be on India. And primarily, we believe that the domestic inflation and growth is what is going to drive and determine our stance and our policy repo rate. So we'll continue to look at our domestic, while being vigilant, of course, and they will have certainly an impact. The global environment will have an impact. But as I mentioned, we are in a better position because our export, import, our interconnectedness with the outside world vis-a-vis some of the smaller economies and even, China, larger economies, is much less.
Thank you, sir. Next, we'll have Mr. Anup from Bloomberg.
Governor, the tariffs have set in. Do you expect a currency war in the region, considering that we have different rates of tariffs here? And how will you respond in such a situation?
Understand what you mean by a currency war?
Competitive devaluation of currencies.
I really don't know, what will happen on the currencies. Our currency is quite stable. As I mentioned, we have sufficient reserves, almost 700 billion, US dollars now, inching up over there. And our deficits are also, again, very sustainable both this year and going forward, the next year, 1%. So I really don't think, we are under any kind of a stressful position. Again, I mentioned, and that's, I think, relevant over here, that our interconnectedness is on, especially, the trade side is less. Capital flows, again, we need good growth to come in over here. That will help. And we'll see, as the situation evolves.
Thank you, sir. Moving on, we'll have Ankur from ET Now.
Thank you so much for giving me a chance. Governor, we have seen in the past that Reserve Bank of India has been little concerned about the co-lending arrangements, and there has been few scrutinies also. Today, you have announced that the arrangement between banks and the NBFC that will be extended to all other regulated entities, and also priority sector lending was the first preference earlier. Now you are saying that all other loans can also be utilized. Is there a shift of stance of Reserve Bank of India on these norms, both priority sector lending, because I saw that there were norms which were revised where thresholds were increased earlier in PSL norms, and now this arrangement between banks and other entities in co-lending?
I don't understand, the shift that you are talking about. I'll request the DG to come in case there is a shift. But I believe that the co-lending arrangement has actually helped in the priority sector lending, because it was restricted to priority sector lending. And now what we are doing is expanding it to the other segments outside the priority sector lending as well. Moreover, we are expanding it. Right now it was, only REs, only, the banks and the NBFCs which could enter into this arrangement. Now 2 banks together can also enter into this arrangement. The benefit, basically of co-lending is that on the one hand, you get benefit, the borrowers, get benefit of lower interest rates, because the banks have funds at lower rates. And what they don't have in reach is compensated, is provided by the NBFCs. So it's a win-win, primarily for the banks and NBFCs. So we are expanding it. You want to add something on the co-lending? Has there been a change in our staff? I thought, we have been...
Nothing much, sir. I don't think there has been any change in the stance. It is essentially, as you said, we are expanding the participants by extending this to all regulated entities. And we are also seeking to extend the coverage beyond the PSL, and also a bit of harmonization in terms of when more players come and more segments open up, there has got to be more clear guidelines. So the guidelines will be soon out, and we will take again the feedback, and in case if it requires to be fine-tuned, we will do. But it has been a beneficial arrangement for the market. While the AUM is not yet significant, probably by broad-basing the participants and the segments, we expect this to pick up. So it will be, the guidelines will be more facilitative in terms of ensuring that the borrower ultimately gets the benefit of someone who has a cost advantage, someone who has a reach. The benefit of both should reach the ultimate end consumer. That's our intent.
Thank you, sirs. अब मैं जी बिजनेस से एकता सूरी को आमंत्रित करूंगा कि वो अपना प्रश्न पूछें.
गुड आफ्टरनून सर। सर आपने हाल ही में बहुत बार ये एक दो बार जगह आपने ये बोला कि केवाईसी जो है वो कस्टमर्स के लिए ईज आउट प्रोसेस होना चाहिए, बार बार उन्हें फोन नहीं आना चाहिए। तो इसको लेकर सर क्या हम एक्सपेक्ट कर सकते हैं, क्योंकि सी केवाईसी में बहुत सी इनडिस्क्रिपेंसीज हैं, बहुत सा रेपिटेशन है, डेटा पुराना है। और दूसरा ये कि बैंक्स में ट्रस्ट होने के लिए अब फ्रॉड, डिजिटल फ्रॉड्स बहुत ज्यादा बढ़ रहे हैं, लेकिन कस्टमर्स आज भी जब बैंक में जाते हैं एक जेन्युइन फ्रॉड को लेकर भी, तो भी पैसा वापस मिलने में बहुत दिक्कत आती है। तो वहां क्या कोई स्टांस जो है कड़े हो सकते हैं, म्यूल हंटर जो है वो मदद कर रहा है, या फिर IC4 के साथ अगर एपीआई बैंक अपने इंटीग्रेट कर रहे हैं उस प्रोसेस में कुछ तेजी आ रही है, तो यहाँ हम क्या देख सकते हैं जो कस्टमर के लिए और ईजी हो बैंकिंग करना और ट्रस्ट वर्दी हो, कुछ विश्वास बढ़े?
केवाईसी हमारे लिए एक निश्चित रूप से हमारे लिए प्राथमिकता है कि किस प्रकार से हम केवाईसी की जो पूरी प्रक्रिया है उसको हम सस्ता बनाएं एक और दूसरी ओर जो है उसको हम सुगम बनाएं। सरल, सुगम और सस्ता किस प्रकार से बना सकते हैं, ये हमारी एक प्राथमिकता है। और इसके लिए हमें बैंक्स और जो सरसाए है, जो CKYCR जिसका आपने जिक्र किया, उसको मेंटेन करता है, उनके साथ में तालमेल बढ़ा करके इसको और अधिक सुगम करने की हमारे को निश्चित रूप से इसमें आवश्यकता है। इसके बारे में मैंने पहले भी कहा है, लेकिन ये उतना आसान कार्य नहीं है क्योंकि इतनी अधिक संख्या में हमारी रेगुलेटेड एंटिटीज हैं जो कि भिन्न भिन्न स्थानों के ऊपर में केवाईसी कर रही हैं। तो किस प्रकार से ये एक यूनिफाइड डेटाबेस हो जिसके अंदर में एक व्यक्ति का, यदि कोई भी रेगुलेटेड एंटिटी चाहे किसी भी नियामक आयोग, किसी भी रेगुलेटर के अंतर्गत आती हो, उसका यदि केवाईसी हो जाता है तो पुनः दूसरे रेगुलेटेड एंटिटी को उसको केवाईसी करने की आवश्यकता नहीं पड़े। CKYC सरसाई CKYCR को अपग्रेड कर रहा है, CKYCR 2.0 के लिए उसने कदम उठाए हैं। 100 करोड़ के करीब अभी उसके अंदर उनके पास में रिकॉर्ड्स हैं, तो ये काफी अच्छी संख्या उनके पास में ऑलरेडी हो चुकी है जिसको हम आगे इसको हम लिवरेज कर सकते हैं। क्वालिटी के इश्यूज जैसे आपने बताया है उसको हमारे को इम्प्रूव करना पड़ेगा, लेकिन हमारा यही प्रयास रहेगा कि किस प्रकार से ऑलरेडी भारत सरकार ने अब ये निर्देश दिए हैं, एक नियम बनाया है उन्होंने, और हमने भी अपने निर्देश सभी रेगुलेटेड एंटिटीज को दिए हैं कि उसकी पालना की जाए कि केवाईसी करने से पूर्व CKYCR को पहले वो चेक करें, वो देखें कि CKYCR में यदि डॉक्यूमेंट्स ऑलरेडी मौजूद हैं, केवाईसी अगर ऑलरेडी पहले से हुआ है तो उसको पुनः केवाईसी डॉक्यूमेंट्स न लेने पड़े। तो ये निर्देशों की, नियमों की पालना होने में निश्चित रूप से थोड़ा समय लगता है क्योंकि बैंक को अपना सिस्टम में बदलाव करना पड़ेगा, उनके IT सिस्टम में बदलाव करना, तो उसको वो बदलाव की प्रक्रिया जारी है क्योंकि ये हमारी प्राथमिकता है, भारत सरकार की प्राथमिकता है। मुझे ये विश्वास है कि निश्चित रूप से आने वाले समय में केवाईसी और अधिक सुगम, सरल, सस्ता होगा। फ्रॉड के लिए हमने विभिन्न कदम उठाए हैं। मैं निवेदन करूंगा अगर आप अनुमति दें अंग्रेजी में, हिंदी में मिस्टर स्वामीनाथन को कि वो जो है आपको विस्तार से इसके बारे में कि फ्रॉड के लिए हमने क्या क्या, म्यूल हंटर की क्या स्थिति है। मैं आई रिक्वेस्ट DG स्वामीनाथन, हमने म्यूल हंटर की क्या हमारी आगे के लिए, एक साल में हम कहाँ तक म्यूल हंटर में कहाँ पहुंचना चाहते हैं, कहाँ पे हम आज के दिन में आपने म्यूल हंटर का कई सारे प्रश्न आपने एक साथ पूछ लिए तो ये कई सारे प्रश्नों का जवाब देने के लिए let me get my team in.
Just to sum up on the responses, basically digital frauds has been a major concern for all of us. And we have been working to ensure that the fraud risk management and the proactive risk management systems that are operational at the bank level are improvised so that frauds can be prevented. Well, of course, you also mentioned about if it occurs, what should be the compensation. There are limiting liability guidelines that are already in place. What we also have to bear in mind is that such money moves very fast and it doesn't remain in the control of the regulated entities oftentimes. But wherever possible, they are being impounded and being refunded, while success rates depends on how quickly the complaint is lodged and how quickly it is acted upon. You also mentioned about I4C integration. Today, we have all the banks have very actively, proactively integrated with the I4C system. And all the banks have also been mandated to have a 24/7 helpline and dedicated officials who will handle these calls so that any point in time, the action is taken very quickly. Golden hour is what believed in the medical system. The same thing is what we believe in digital frauds as well. We should adopt. The third is in terms of Mule Hunter, the pilots have been extremely successful. The results that are coming out in terms of having the whole system level data, the fraud prevention system in the banks work on their own bank data, while the Mule Hunter facilitates system level data. The pilots that we have done with large banks have been highly successful. The outcomes are almost near real time, and the models have proved to be effective. But these are AI/ML based models. They need time to learn. They need more data to digest and then become more successful. So we will take this pilot into production as quickly as possible. Innovation Hub has been working with the large banks have been participating. It is our intention that we become as near real time as possible to ensure frauds are prevented as much as possible, and should a fraud occur, and recover as much and as quickly as possible. That's the aim, but this will be a journey because we have to remember that the fraudsters are always one step ahead. So we are invariably on a catch-up game, but we will probably catch up better.
Dhanyavad, sir. Thank you, sir. Next, we'll have Gopika from the Mint.
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon, Governor. Since the time you took charge, we've seen three crises at three different institutions, one at a private sector bank, a new cooperative bank, and a housing finance company. What are the key, these three crises have happened under RBI's nose over a long period of time. What is RBI's learnings from this? And secondly, in the private sector bank, IndusInd Bank per se, RBI would have received the internal review report. Are there any concerns that we have to be worried about? And the management has been allowed to continue. So could you tell us your views on this?
See, individual entities, you are aware, we don't get into, the specifics of the individual entities. At a system level, I would say that, and I mentioned this even in my statement, whether it is the cooperative banks, whether it is the NBFCs or the scheduled commercial banks, etc. System level, we are very, very safe, secure, robust. The system is resilient. The other thing is that let's keep in mind that it's a very, very large system. There are a large number of players, almost 10,000 NBFCs. There are about 1,500 cooperative banks. So I was looking at data in last 8 or 9 years, some 70 cooperative banks out of 1,500 cooperative banks. So that makes it about, you can calculate. So it's very small, in numbers it may seem, so these things will happen. Our effort is to minimize the impact, to minimize them. And I think it is quite it's a reasonable, it's quite low. It's quite low. If you look at, I will not have data to support that, but I would tend to believe that, and I would not call them, total failures also. So I'm not, these are episodes. These are episodes, right? They're not even failures. These episodes will happen. We have to ensure through various means that these events, incidents happen lesser in frequency. They happen lesser in frequency. And for that, we have various tools. We have the regulations. We have our supervision. The banks themselves, have multiple layers. They have 3 layers: the business unit layer, their compliance layer, then their audit. So all of them, we have to all work together and continuously try to improve the systems.
Thank you, sir. May I have Ms. Sangeeta Mehta from Economic Times?
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Sir, related to Gopika's question on IndusInd, can RBI take any action on auditors? I mean, because they've been saying that this is happening for 5 to 7 years. And how did it miss how did auditors miss this completely?
Individual, as I mentioned, I would not like to get into any individual entity or an individual auditor or anyone. We have good systems in place to be able to detect wherever possible, as early as possible, non-compliances, risks, and we take preemptive as well as wherever required corrective action. Yeah.
Just to supplement on what Governor said in terms of both the questions, without getting into any particular entity, one is, of course, we never waste a good crisis. There will be learnings, and the supervisory tools will get better with each episode as they play out. It's our intention to minimize and, more importantly, ensure that the customers remain protected, even if accidents play out. So in each of these crises, we have taken adequate steps to ensure that the customer inconvenience is minimized and customer money is protected to the extent as much as possible, so that these episodes are dealt with independently. Coming to your question, essentially, whenever such failures happen, it is part, while of course we take risk mitigants in terms of protecting the customers. On the other side, we also direct the boards to ensure that proper forensic and accountability studies are held, and then whomsoever is accountable, whether they are internal, external, or service providers, all of them will get covered in that, and actions will play out, and it will take its due course in terms of if there were any lapses, and they will be dealt with appropriately. I don't want to say in specific reference to any particular episode, but in every episode there will be, apart from the repair that gets carried out, there will also be an accountability which will follow. So we'll wait for that outcome. We don't need to speculate about that here. That will be.
Is it forensic and one more report?
For the accountability, as to
Accountability report.
Part of that, essentially to see whether there were any lapses, and if lapses, then who should be held accountable. Is something which is part of every such episode that plays out. We are more concerned in terms of ensuring that the rectification is done as expeditiously as possible, and that there is no loss or inconvenience to the customers. These are our priorities essentially. That's something which we deal with on priority, then deal with fixing people.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Sir, with your kind permission, last 4 questions.
Yes.
Thank you, sir. Towards the right, sir, we'll have Mr. Piyush from Hindu Business Line. Oh, sorry, towards the left. Yeah.
Good afternoon, Governor, DGs. Thanks for it, sir. Sir, on gold loan, essentially, NBFCs have LTV of around 70 to 80%, and banks have around 60 to 70%. So when you say you'll harmonize the norms, will you bring that to a common level? Separately, sir, you spoke about failures of the relative lesser number of failures of banks. In terms of NICB, you've given some relaxation as well. But have you assessed, sir, what is the actually, the fraud that happened, the amount, and will you actually let the bank to, accept customers again? I mean, will you remove the restriction, or the impact is so severe that you may not be able to do so? Thanks. Also, just a clarification, the accommodator stance, is it, is it unanimous, or there was a...
I mentioned it in my statement that it is unanimous.
There's no mention in the statement.
So it was unanimous. We missed that part. So it was unanimous. Certainly, all the members voted, all the members decided unanimously. There was no vote on that, but all of them decided unanimously that they feel that going forward, the trajectory is actually an easing trajectory. LTV, you will soon, have the guidelines. Let's not speculate. You will soon have, the guidelines with respect to the gold loans. And what was your other question that you had?
NICB, sir, will you remove the
Entities we don't get into. Our effort, what is there? DG Swaminathan has already mentioned, what our effort is to protect, the consumers, the customers, to protect their interests. And going forward, see, how best we can salvage the situation and improve the situation. That's our effort for all entities. And similar will be the case, even in this case.
Thank you, sir. And now towards the right, Mr. Siddharth from Informist Media.
Thank you, sir. Afternoon, Governor. The RBI has assumed an exchange rate of 86 per dollar for FY26 in its CPI GDP projections, and that there'll be no major structural policy changes. Are we to take from that the RBI expects very little pressure on the rupee from the ongoing tariff war, if you want to call it, and that India and the US may not be able to strike an agreement of any sort in this year? Second, on liquidity, why is the RBI still conducting VRRs when there is so much surplus liquidity, excess of almost 1.5 lakh crores? Is there any threshold? Is there any framework governing that? Or is it that you think the distribution is skewed and there's increased preference for holding on to liquidity from banks? Thank you.
Your second question first. Liquidity, the VRR, actually, it is one particular entity or a bank may need, liquidity while the whole system is in surplus. Of course, we would like, that the banks amongst themselves lend and borrow so that, this VRR, and I think in my last statement also, I made a mention of this so that we don't have to do this. But still some banks prefer, to come to the Reserve Bank. And so that's why, we don't want to curtail that opportunity for them. So that's why, that is there. The second question, is a very difficult question, as to what, going forward, the exchange rate is going to be, and how things are going to play out. I already mentioned, I really, we believe, that 80, so this is our baseline assumption. And we have said, that there are risks, on the both sides. And you have seen it. In the past 3-4 months also, rupee going, one end and then, going the other end. You really don't know, how so uncertain that you really can't take a bet on what's going to happen in the near or in the, medium term.
Thank you, sir. Next, we'll have Mr. Sachin Kumar from Financial Express.
Good afternoon, Governor. My question was on a similar line.
It's all about sentiments, no? See, things changing, overnight, one day, each day.
So, sir, my question is on that despite severe liquidity deficit in the January, February, March, we saw banks parking nearly 1.5 lakh crore in the SDF, and this is despite last time you mentioned that banks should be actively trading among themselves. So what is your, do you think there is a need for some regulatory intervention to prevent this trend?
No, I mean, I don't think there is any regulatory need for it. The markets will play out. We need to make markets more efficient, I think. So this intervention from the Reserve Bank is not required, and it's a very small portion. It's not very high. The VRR is about 23 last year. Yesterday was about 23,000 when we had a surplus of about 150,000 crore. It's not negligible, but it's not very high also.
Thanks.
Thank you, sir. आखिर में मैं श्यामा जी from दूरदर्शन आप अपना प्रश्न पूछें.
नमस्कार सर. सर रिसेंट आप उसके बाद यूसीबी से मिले भी थे और कोऑपरेटिव सेक्टर बैंक्स हैं उनकी सेहत को लेके आप क्या कहेंगे और एक आम कस्टमर को सरकार से आश्वासन देना चाहिए?
नहीं, जैसे मैंने कहा कि जो हमारा पूरा बैंकिंग सेक्टर है, और जब मैं बैंकिंग सेक्टर की बात कर रहा हूं तो उसमें हमारा जो अर्बन कोऑपरेटिव बैंक सेक्टर है वो उसके अंदर में सम्मिलित है. तो कुल मिलाकर के बैंकिंग सेक्टर के जो भी फाइनेंशियल्स हैं वो अच्छे हैं, सुदृढ़ हैं. अगर आप अर्बन कोऑपरेटिव बैंक की भी बात करते हैं तो उनका भी जो क्रेडिट CRAR है वो अच्छा सुदृढ़ 15% से ऊपर है। और साथ ही साथ आप देखिए वो एक बहुत महत्वपूर्ण भूमिका निभा रहे हैं। आज के दिन में करीबन 5-5.5 लाख करोड़ रुपए के डिपॉजिट्स जो है वो विभिन्न लोगों से वो ले रहे हैं और लगातार इसमें वृद्धि हो रही है। ऐसा नहीं है कि ये श्रिंक कर रहा है, लगभग 8-8.5-9% प्रति वर्ष पिछले 20 वर्ष में अगर कोई सेक्टर यदि बढ़ रहा है तो एज अ सेक्टर, एज अ सिस्टम जो है वो उसकी शक्ति और उसके महत्व को बताती है। कुछ एक बैंक्स यदा कदा, जैसे मैंने कहा, वो NBFC भी हो सकता है, वो शेड्यूल्ड कमर्शियल बैंक भी हो सकता है, UC भी हो सकता है। वो इस प्रकार के एपिसोड्स यदा कदा वो आएंगे और उसके लिए हम जो भी कार्रवाई आवश्यक होगी, जो कि आवश्यक है, वो हम करेंगे।
Thank you, sir. With this, we come to the close of this conference. I thank the governor and the deputy governors for taking the questions. Thank you all, and I wish you a pleasant day.
Congratulations.
Thank you.